Some people put spoilers on their hatchback, others wear expensive running shoes for their morning jog, and some people buy mid-range gaming laptops with 144Hz displays. I am one such person, and I'm here to see if I can answer the question on everyone's lips. You taking the piss? A 144Hz display paired with a modestly powerful GPU like the RTX 2060 Max-Q can be a real boon for esports titles and competitive shooters, but in truth, you're not going to be enjoying that high refresh gaming experience in AAA games, even if the hardware is technically capable of it, without making some compromises. Mobile CPUs and GPUs abide by mobile rules, which means power and thermals take priority over clock speeds, and those limits are going to make it difficult to achieve high frame rates in many games. In this video then, I'm looking at a modern mid-range laptop with a 144Hz screen and investigating exactly how gamers are supposed to take advantage of it. The laptop in question is the 2020 Razer Blade 15 base model, loaded with the aforementioned RTX 2060 Max-Q, an Intel i7-10750H and 16GB of RAM. This spec of laptop is pretty common and can be had for £1,000 or less, even brand new in some cases. I've done a full video looking into the laptop in recent and popular games. If you haven't watched it yet, there'll be a link at the end of the video. In search of higher frame rates, I knew I'd need to get some more performance from the CPU, and as the current revision of Razer's BIOS has disabled the user CPU power control, utilities like Intel XTU and throttle stop aren't going to help. The only control available is through Razer Synapse software, which allows the selection of one of three performance profiles: Balanced, Gaming and Creator. Creator being the only one of the three to kick the i7's TDP up from 35 watts to 45. So for most of today's testing, this is the mode I'll be using. I started with the proof of concept, using the high refresh display in the manner it's intended with Apex Legends. I wasn't aware of this in advance, but I found a little bit of a bug. With frame rate set to unlimited, the game was refusing to exceed 144 FPS. Almost as if I had VSync enabled. I actually had to switch to the adaptive sync option, which allows the game to exceed 144, though once I did, the game absolutely flew. Averages at 1080 low hit 163 FPS with lows of 101. Now for something more challenging, Call of Duty Warzone. Although I haven't really been aiming for 144 FPS in any of my previous graphics card tests on this channel, I've also never achieved it, even by accident. Well, after having dropped settings to their lowest and played around with various DLSS configurations, I still failed. The GPU is not being fully utilised at 1080 low, so using DLSS has no effect on performance, still averaging around 110 FPS. In fact, by adjusting settings, I was able to get the same frame rates at medium quality with DLSS Ultra. This is still a good result and an argument in favour of a high refresh screen, but I can't help but feel that with some more control over the CPU, I could have achieved 144 with this setup. Cyberpunk might have launched in an unfinished state, loaded with bugs, missing a bunch of content, and at the heart of a ton of other controversies, but it still represents the cutting edge of PC gaming tech right now, even almost a year after release. It seems though that the CPU is going to let us down once again. With the creator profile enabled, the processor still tops out just below 4 GHz most of the time. Dropping crowd density to low, selecting the low graphics preset, and DLSS balanced gets me about as far as I'm going to get here. That means an average of 86 FPS, dropping to 1% lows of 55.6. I'm actually a bit of a Cyberpunk fanboy, and as I've said elsewhere, I usually err on the side of visual fidelity over frame rate, but I have to say, DLSS balanced actually does a pretty tidy job here. Control is a stylish game with some low-key amazing art direction that really deserves to be played at high settings. Though at 1080 the high preset doesn't quite allow the laptop to reach 60 FPS. Surprisingly, even dropping each setting manually to low doesn't sacrifice too much quality, giving frame rates in the high 90s and low 100s at the display's native 1080 resolution. Add in DLSS with a render resolution of 720, and that gives an average just scraping over the target of 144 with 1% lows at 100. We don't appear to be CPU limited either. Dropping down to 1114 by 626 saw frame rates climb to the mid 160s, though the integrated display won't take full advantage of that extra performance, and DLSS starts to get a bit weird the lower you drop the render resolution. I have to admit, I was surprised the game still looks this good, despite the compromise. RDR2 might well be a demanding game, but it's also a scalable one. I've seen people like RG and HD run this game on some very low-end graphics cards, so I had reason to be hopeful that my experiment might be a success. To set a baseline, I started by dragging the quality slider as far as Prefer Quality at 1080 and got an average of 45. Dropping settings to their lowest more than doubled that average to 93. I worked my way down through the various DLSS settings and saw incremental improvements, though not enough to reach my target. Going from DLSS balanced to performance to ultra performance only gained an extra 5 FPS with each drop, with the latter reaching just shy of 120 FPS. Beyond this, things get a bit ridiculous. 1080 ultra performance already looks like somebody threw up on the screen and tried to clean it up with a tissue. Reducing output resolution to 900 makes things even worse for only a further 5 FPS gain. Starting from 720 reveals that the CPU won't allow any more gains to be had, only a single frame faster than 900. Watch Dogs Legion is a demanding title, and I didn't have particularly high hopes of it reaching 144 FPS. My original testing from the previous video saw an average of 61 at very high settings, jumping to 73 with DLSS quality. As I dropped the settings further, the CPU rapidly put a stop to any further performance gains. My best result was at 1080 medium, which, with DLSS, averaged 85 FPS with 1% lows around the mid-60s. Reducing settings to low gave almost exactly the same frame rate as medium, with GPU usage in the low 70s most of the time. I've been leaning pretty heavily on DLSS to get me through this video so far, and a lot of the games tested would have been a hell of a lot uglier or less readable without it. To switch things up then, how about a game that doesn't support DLSS? Enter Horizon Zero Dawn. As well as being about as demanding as any game on the PC in 2021, any image scaling is going to come with a more tangible drop in image quality. Running at low with default scaling averages 87 with lows of 75, but dropping scaling to 50%, effectively 960 by 540, sees that climb as high as 132. One more drop in resolution to half of 1600 by 900 is all it takes to get to the target, with an average of 149 and lows of 101. Like Control, Resident Evil Village isn't a battle royale or an open world adventure, and as such doesn't rely on the CPU as heavily as other titles in the list. The initial testing resulted in an impressive 90 FPS average, even with a fair few graphical bells and whistles enabled, so it's no surprise that dropping the quality preset to performance and using the FSR quality scaler saw averages jump to 154 FPS and lows to 114. I admit I'd prepared a very different conclusion for this video. When I first started poking around on the Razer Blade 15 and found I couldn't change the CPU voltage, the TDP, the turbo boost duration, my heart kinda sank. I didn't see how the stock configuration was going to support high frame rates in modern games. In fact, I had my doubts about even easy to run titles like Valorant. Thankfully, I did manage to find a workaround that would at least force the CPU into a higher power state through the rather unintuitively named Creator mode, but I was still ready to eviscerate Razer for this. Of the 8 titles tested, only half hit the 144 FPS target average, and one of those that succeeded, and one that came close, only did so by being reduced to an almost unplayable mess visually. By rights, I should call this an outright failure. After all, the high refresh screen is a key selling point of these laptops, And unless you already know about esports games and competitive shooters, an average consumer might have expected more than they got. My unexpected conclusion, however, is, well, more complicated. Yes, it's not the most consumer-friendly marketing in the world, and anyone expecting to pick one up and see immediate high refresh results in AAA games is probably going to be disappointed. Like the layman who bought the hatchback with a spoiler, expecting added downforce, I've been sold something based on a marketing ploy. Unlike the hypothetical spoiler, however, the 144Hz display actually does do something. Even if you don't try to max it out like I did here, there is a tangible benefit. The feeling of using the computer every day is improved by having a snappier, more fluid display, and while most games won't run at 144 FPS, even with settings and resolutions dropped, features like DLSS do allow for greater than 60 FPS in the majority of games. And while the CPU can't really support 144 FPS as configured by Razer, other laptops with less stringent TDP limits or better CPUs might get better results. If you have something like a Dell G3, HP Omen 15, Lenovo Legion 5 or similar, let me know your experience in the comments. I guess other laptops allow more control over things like voltage, TDP and boost duration, and I'd be interested to know if you've had more luck maxing out the 144Hz display on your laptop. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.